Hello everybody, welcome and good evening. It is 7 p.m. in a surprisingly sunny UK countryside here. Welcome one and all members. For those of you joining us from the sunshine, thank you. We had a record number of attendees sign up for Leading Voices today. Oh, hello Olivier. Olivier's just joined us. Thank you so much. He's jumped straight from another call, so we're really grateful. Olivia, you've just caught me doing the introduction, so perfect timing. But welcome one and all. Like I said, a surprisingly sunny and balmy UK evening here. So if you are joining us from the garden, then a huge cheers to you. But welcome to our latest instalment of Leading Voices, where we bring together some of the leading, surprise, surprise, experts, thought leaders, and we bring them together on a topic from the world of wine. Like I said, this is our most subscribed ever. We've had over 200 applicants for this evening's session. I know some of you will be watching on YouTube afterwards for those who can't make live. So welcome to you YouTube viewers as well. But the idea is that this can all be enjoyed from the comfort of your own home. So welcome. I'm Anna Spooner from the Wine Society, your host for the evening, and we have Mahesh behind the scenes tonight joining me and helping with the technology and answering all your questions in the chat too. So before I introduce the speakers and our incredibly interesting topic tonight, two small pieces of housekeeping. Firstly, do please put your questions into the Q&A section on Zoom. Use the chat to let us know where you are and what you're drinking, but Mahesh will be managing and collating the questions for the final portion of this evening's session, and it's much better and easier if you can find them all in the Q&A box. And then secondly, there's two ways you can view this evening. You can view it as speaker view, i.e. just watching the person talking, or you can view all panelists. So myself and our three esteemed speakers tonight. And if you want to change the viewing options, you simply scroll right to left on a tablet, or you click on one of the corners, depending on which laptop you have, to change from speaker to gallery view. So that's the housekeeping out the way. So let me get on to the fun stuff, shall we? I can apologise in advance to all of our speakers. I'm a little under the weather still, so I actually haven't got any wine to taste this evening, but I have seen that already members have said that they've got wine. There is no tasting order per se. Tonight is a discussion, but obviously drink and taste in whichever order you wish, members, especially if you have all three of the recommended wines. I'm going to be enjoying them over the weekend. So I'm going to introduce the three speakers, and then we're going to crack on with some questions and a little bit of an introduction into what on earth biodynamics is. So first up, I'll just introduce it in a simple order, I think, before we hand over to Olivier. We'll start with Jason Haas. So Jason, for those members who don't know, is a partner and general manager at Tablas Creek in Paso Robles, California. He has explored all sorts of farming, organic, biodynamic, and now regenerative organic farming, and writes and communicates regularly on the subjects. He's really considered one of the agri-stars of Californian wine. And when I met Jason in California in 2017, I think it was, as a young sort of wine newbie, his pragmatic approach to biodynamics completely changed the way I viewed the subject. So thrilled to have Jason here this evening. So welcome, Jason. Birgit Braunstein is a true visionary, I would say, of Austrian viticulture. And I met Birgit this year, actually, in Austria, where I met her at a walk-around tasting, but two of my fellow MW students had been to visit her in her winery, or in her vineyards more specifically. And I think what we all agreed was that Birgit really brings a sense of spirituality and this sort of otherness to all of the wines, but without ever compromising on quality. And this holistic approach to biodynamics certainly shone out for my two fellow MW students, who waxed lyrical about her for the rest of the week. And then last but not least, before I hand over to everyone to do a quick intro to themselves, Olivier Humbrecht, MW, who was the first Master of Wine in France, I believe, and also the champion of biodynamics in Alsace, I would say, after converting his family estate, Humbrecht, alongside residing as the president of Biodynamics. and is a truly humble master on this subject. So we're also thrilled to have him here to join us today, especially as all of these three are incredibly busy, and it's been a bit of a mission to try and pin them all three down at the same time. So I thank you so much. So I'm going to allow each and every one of you to do a small introduction of yourselves and who you are, where you make wine, and a little bit about how long you've been producing or farming, I should say, biodynamically. So Olivier, are we happy to kick off with you? Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. So, Olivier Umbrecht, I joined the family winery, the Domaine d'Umbrecht, back in 1989 after studying enology, agronomy, and also doing my MW in London in 1989. We converted the estate to biodynamic farming officially with certification in 98 and started to experiment in 95, 96.
Fantastic. Thank you, Olivier. And in a moment, we're going to come back to you to give us a nice introduction onto the subject. But before we do that, Birgit, if I could hand over to you and you could tell us a bit about yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Birgit Braunstein from Austria, Burgenland. I live in Purbach, a really small, tiny city, village next to the lake, Neusiedlersee. And my winery is 400 years old. We have a long history in the family. I'm sitting here in the old tasting rooms. We are working organic since 2006 and biodynamic 2009. So we are pioneer of biodynamic working in Austria.
Thank you so much, Birgit. And then last but not least, joining us from California in the morning, so perhaps not with wine, but maybe coffee, Jason. So cheers. And I think you're on, yeah, thanks, Jason. Hello.
Excellent. Thanks, Anna. It's an honor to be on with everyone. We have not been making wine here for 400 years. We are at Tablas Creek. We are on year 32. We're co-founded by the Perrin family of Château de Beaucastel in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And our model here is to kind of translate the inspiration of Châteauneuf-du-Pape into California. We inherited organic farming from what they do at Beaucastel. They've been organic since the 1950s. We've been organic since our inception in 1989. Started incorporating biodynamic elements in 2010, got our biodynamic certification in 2016. And then have been working to kind of explore regenerative farming and pioneer the regenerative organic movement since 2018 here.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. What I'm most excited about the three speakers this evening, members, is lots of similar principles, but lots of slightly different viewpoints, attitudes, and all coming from very, very different terroir, experience, weather, climate, etc. So we're in for a bit of a treat here on a wide stretching evening around a very complex subject of biodynamics. So on the complex subject, it felt only right that somebody with far more knowledge than myself give a better introduction. I know many members will also know a little bit about biodynamics. Some will know a lot. But Olivier, if I can hand over to you to give a nice overview and a bit of an understanding for members less familiar with biodynamic principles.
Okay, I hope I will not be scaring too many people or making it too complicated. And I always say, usually people understand biodynamic better if they have a glass of wine and drink it. And the more they drink of the wine, the better they will understand what I'm going to say. So I'd just like to go back a little bit in history to understand why we decided to go into that direction, because I think it's quite important to understand also why so many wineries nowadays are going into this direction. First, the French, but the wine scene in the world back in the 60s, 70s went through major changes. These were clonal selection for the vines, products that would allow the wine growers to fight certain disease in a much easier way, in a very efficient way. Also, apparitions of much more efficient fertilizers. So globally in the 60s, 70s, the production per vineyard doubled or tripled in most vineyards around the world. But also at the same time, the quality of the vines decreased, not the wine, the vines itself, and became less and less resistant to many problems, which created a kind of accelerating factor where wine growers had to, every year go back with more and more efficient products and chemicals. And because, a pest, a disease, a mushroom is not a stupid organism. Like anyone else, they try to survive in a very tough environment. So they learn also how to fight against these products. It's like the problem with antibiotics. An antibiotic that was extremely efficient maybe 40 years ago, today wouldn't even cure a small sneeze, So it was an accelerating of technology back in the 80s. And also wine growers got used to work more comfortably, in bigger machine, bigger tractors, air conditioning arrived and all these kind of things. People were not used to work physically, manually in the vineyards anymore. And also you get used to the comfort of not having to use very hard techniques in the vineyard, And when someone dressed with a tie and a white blouse, like my father used to say, and tells you, do this, you'll see it's easier, cheaper, faster, more efficient. Who are we to contradict the doctor when he tells you to take a pill? You just say yes, and you don't ask what's in it and how it works and all this. But you learn the hard way. Sometimes that is not always as nice as it sounds. And when I arrived on the estate, despite the fact my father was what you would call sustainable or partly organic by buying organic, compost and things like that, and not using certain chemicals, due to the slope of certain of our vineyards, some of the soils were covered with herbicides. And also, of course, we're using heavy machine and tractor because it's more comfortable than doing it behind a horse, So soils were sometimes compacted, biodiversity was going down. We get more and more predators developing around it because there was also less good guys to eat the bad guys, if you want. And also with the global climate change that started in the 70s and 80s, is not very recent, we also started to get in Alsace more and more cryptogamic disease. That's mostly mildew. You know very well, in a very cold country, you don't get many mushrooms because it's too cold. So as the temperatures go up, we also get more Plasmopora viticola, which is the mildew, which is a big problem to most wine growers around the world. So I decided we have to stop all this. We're on a slippery slope, trying to run faster, not to fall down, but one day we're going to hit a wall somewhere. So let's go organic. And my first decision was to, instead of buying organic compost in a bag, like you go into the, garden shop, let's make it ourselves. So you'll be more alive and you can make more and it'll be of better quality. And it was a total failure because the first manure I was buying from nearby farms were in fact completely saturated by antibiotics, and it would not go into humus and proper compost when I had it analyzed. So I had to go up in the mountains in Alsace to find, organic farms buying a better manure, and then automatically the compost became of much better quality, the way I liked. And one day that compost was of exceptional quality. And I said, I made a good cake this year, it's like, I don't know why. So I talked to the farmer and said, I would like to buy your manure because of all the manure I bought in the past 5 years, it's with your manure I made my best compost. And the guy said to me, I knew you were going to compost it and not just put the manure in the vineyards. That's why I sprayed some 500 on it before you took it. And I said, you are a biodynamist. And he was a biodynamist farmer. I didn't know it, but I knew what 500 meant at the time because I was talking to other wine growers in the 90s and all this that were also experimenting with biodynamic farming. So I'll explain later what 500 is. And I said, okay, if biodynamic farming makes a manure that allowed me to make a better compost, let's go the stage further and let's dynamize my compost like we do when a biodynamist farmer. So I bought the preparations, put it in it. I was surprised it was quickly done. It wasn't very expensive. And because I'm a scientist at the base. I made 2 hip, one dynamized, the other one not, and I analyzed them. And in the one that was dynamized by the biodynamic preparations, I had 1 million times more microorganisms than in the other one that was already quite a good compost, you know. And if you compare to the bad compost it made in the beginning, it's not 1 million times more. We're talking trillions times more microorganisms. So I said, well, if I can make a better compost by dynamizing it, let's do something in the vineyard also. So in '96, I bought my first dynamizer, started to do the preparation and the whole process, and found it quite fun. And also, I found the vineyard very quickly responding to certain things. Very quickly, we could see more biodiversity, more insects in the vineyard, things you could see, you know, not just analyze. And everybody was happy amongst the team because you didn't have to wear big masks to spray stuff. We were also concerned by environment, you know, health and all this. And it was a very nice and gentle process like this. Of course, we had issues because, as I said before, technology and chemicals allows you to work easier, faster, with less pain. So we had to find back old plows to put behind small tractors and all these kind of things. Some vineyards were not accessible to machines, so we had to go back by hand into it or by horses or winch if it was too steep. So all these were issues in the beginning, but eventually we went above that. And it was very, very fun. The biggest problem, in fact, for us was to find the people who were willing to sweat back into the vineyard, you know. And in France, people don't really like to sweat too much when they work. So we had to convince them one way or the other. So that's our process, you know. And very quickly, we could see more worms in the soil, more microorganisms. Where I would see deficiency in the vineyard, like lack of magnesium or lack of iron, you see this on the leaves very, very quickly. They turn yellow, they get little signs on the leaves, and you buy very expensive liquid fertilizers to fight that. And all these problems disappeared almost in the same year, you know. And very quickly, there would be predators fighting the bad guys in the vineyard, the bad insects. So again, we were using less and less products into the vineyard. All this was very, very positive. Today, the biggest change I can see in the vineyard, which I didn't expect at the time, it forced me to understand how the vine functioned and to do things from the point of view of the vine and not my point of view. And the thing I understand, which was the most important to me, is we all like to drink wine. I hope if you're watching this program, you all like to drink wine. But to make wine, we need grapes. To make grapes, I need a vineyard that is willing to produce grapes. Okay? And at the base, a vineyard doesn't like to produce grapes. If you plant a vine and don't do anything to it, you'll choose a location which will be a very humid, rich soil, eventually in a forest. It doesn't like to be planted on a hillside full of rocks and very poor soil. It doesn't like to be planted to another vine which is only a few feet next to it. It likes to be left alone. It doesn't like to produce grapes. A vine will only produce grapes after a major stress, like a storm or a big frost or something like that. So what do? We bad wine growers, we go every winter, we prune the vines down very severely to create a massive stress to the vine to make the buds become fertile so we can have a crop the following year. Do you understand? Obliging someone to do something he doesn't want to do is going to do it badly. So for me, biodynamic consists very simply to create an environment around the vineyard which is very positive for the vine, and trying to compensate whatever stress I'm obliging the vine to go through by certain energies, by a certain communication with the vine, by certain preparation with plants also, to compensate all that bad things I'm asking the vine to do, which are grapes. And in biodynamic, technically, if you want to be certified, for example, you only need to do a few things. You have to be organic, of course, so no chemicals and things like that. You would have to use certain preparation that would bring the astral energy and the earth energy to the vine. I can develop that later if you want. These are the famous 500 and 501 preparation, you know, the famous cow horn. You dig into the ground in winter with manure, and in summer with powdered silicium. And through the year, we also use different kind of plants to reinforce the immune system of the vine, but also to tell the vine what to do next. I give you only one example, which is easy to see. When you look at a vine, I'm not going to make a poll now because you are too many people to listen, but who has ever seen the flower of a vine? Not many people. Why? Because it only happens, yeah, of course, if you're a wine grower, I see Jason raising his hand, but if you ask someone, have you ever seen the flower of an oak tree or the flower of a vine? Not many people actually seen it. You all see the fruits, but not the flower. Why? Because the flower happens much, much, much later after spring, when the plant has already grown up a lot, and it's very discreet. And a cherry tree, whether they do the first thing, well, flowers, and then come the leaves and branches and everything else, because it's in the nature of a cherry tree to produce fruits. But that's why you don't need to prune a cherry tree to get cherries. But a vine doesn't. So the flowering process of a vine is a hectic time for the vine. In terms of calendar through the year, when comes the flowering, comes all the problem with the vineyard. Before, it doesn't. You all know that in biodynamic, we follow a certain calendar to do certain things. I'm not going to develop too much, but basically in terms of calendar, up to a little bit before the flowering is very easy for the vineyard because it corresponds to the calendar, what the vineyard likes to do, growing leaves and branches. When comes the flowering, here comes the problem for the vine, because the vine doesn't like to do that. The vine is a bad mother. It doesn't want to flower. It wants to get rid of all these bad fruits and bad grapes there. So we are teaching the vine, it's okay, it's fine. Look at this plant, and we take, for example, the Achillea milleflori. A lot of people who garden have them at the decorative version in the garden, but we take the wild version, which is a very interesting plant because it carries hundreds and thousands of little flowers in a tiny little bouquet like this. We make a decoction, spray into the vineyard, and transmit a message to the vine. This guy knows how to flower, learn from it.
Just on that point, Olivier, would you mind? Yeah. I just know that, sorry to interrupt, but I know that Birgit has given us some beautiful images of preparations. Would it be all right, Birgit, if you maybe talked us through some of those? Because I've got your PowerPoint ready, and I know specifically some of those preparations will be completely new to members, and those sprays. So if you would be happy, Birgit, talk through that. I know we missed a couple of your slides at the beginning, which we can certainly go back to, but I know that you have got some great images on the biodynamic treatments. And if you wouldn't mind sharing some of those, I know we've got 500 and 501 here, but talking a little bit more about that would be fantastic, especially with these images for people to understand.
So yes, of course. Hello, everybody. Is the screen now? You see the screen?
Yes, so we can see the 500 and 501.
Okay, wonderful. So it's good. I completely agree with Oliver's explanation, and it's all of that. What we try to do is that we help the vine. We help the vine to strengthen the forces. I mean, it's nothing to fight against. So it's a completely different approach we have in a biodynamic, now a biodynamic sense. And the two most important impulses we give the vines is that we strengthen the force that for the forces of nature. For the springtime, it is to grow out. So it's nature awakes, and there is the flowering and the growing, and we do it. We enforce and we help this strength with the 500, the cow manure preparation, which is done from manure. We put the manure in the cow horns and we dig it in, and it's stored under the earth for the whole winter time. At about the Eastern time, we bring it out, and then we squirt it in the water, like you see here. We do it by hand, and about an hour we mix the manure, 500 preparations, 5 minutes to the right side, then we make a chaos, then there is a chaos coming and we squeal at the left side, and this is done for an hour. And we spray that water, about 40 liter, you can imagine now, for 10,000 square meters. So it's just like a homeopathic treatment on the earth. And this is like a balsam, like a balm, and it's like a help for the nature to grow. And if you go in springtime, for example, through biodynamic vineyards, and you open your eyes, you open your ears, and you smell, then you will feel the difference, because there is much more power, much more vividity, much more balance in the vineyards, colorful, and the singing of the insects. So this is the one most important thing that in the spring times, when nature awakes, that we try to help nature to grow. Then there's the second preparation is the
sorry.
Okay, you are fine. It's the 501. So it's the crystal. You see it on the right side. It's a crystals from the mountains. We collected them also from Austria. They are really clear, and we take these crystals and we destroy it, we smash it, and then we put the crystals also in the cow horn, and we buried it under the earth during the summertime. And then, like now in June, there is coming the Summer Solstice. This is the time after flowering, the grapes get step by step ripe. So this is a process. We also want to support for the vineyard, the wines, the grapes, to collect the sun. So this is the second impulse, one from the earth with 500, and then after summer solstice, for the ripening, for the concentration, the degeneration, we spray the 501, this crystal preparation, in the aura over the canopy in the vineyards. So it's like a foggy, dusty spraying, and it's awesome when you see it or you go through the vineyards after spraying the vineyards, the leaves immediately they turn and they want to collect the sun. So it's like a photovoltaic machine, and they try to catch the sun. It's like us, like human being. You can imagine probably near Earth. We are standing with our feet on the earth. We are rooted. But we also want to grow up to the sun. We need the sun, and these are the two most important impulses we have, and we use for the biodynamic treatment and the whole year.
Before we move on to Jason, who I know has a kind of slightly different approach, I would say, to the farming of the whole of his vineyard. We do just have one more slide from you, Birgit, which is about the tea and the ashes. So would you mind just explaining a few of these teas, and then we'll be moving on to just hear what Jason has to say to add on top of this.
Okay, so there are also other preparations, like Oli already told you, that there are preparations for the compost, which is really necessary and important for us. It's the compost, it's the humus, it's the balance for our vines. But we also have some special treatments for the vines, like teas and ashes. We have the teas, like in the springtime, the nettle tea, we have the camilla tea, we have the horsetail tea. Like, you also can compare it with us, with human being. We drink a camilla tea to calm down. So it's also during, if it's hot summer and we spray the camilla tea, also the vines get relaxed. Nettle tea in springtime, it's for us very healthy. We get out of, it's kind of, yes, healing and cleaning of body, and it's the same thing, the nettle tea for the vines. It cleans, it's against fungi, but it also gives nutrition. So we also spray the teas in smaller more quantities. It's like homeopathic treatment, but it works out. And the second thing is the ashes, which is quite nice and funny. We have wonderful vineyards next to the forest on the top of the hill, and you have a perfect view to the lake, which is great. But in the forest, there is the wild boar. So they live there, and during the ripeness, harvest time, they love to come out from the forest and they love to eat our grapes. So the last 10 years, we do something special. We do ashes. So we take hairs from the wild boar, we put it in the fire, we make ash out of them, and then we take the ash, we sprinkle it with water, and we spray this ash around the vineyards next to the forest. And the wild boar is thinking, oh my God, my colleague was killed, or there's something happened, and it doesn't come in anymore. So it works out really perfectly.
Thank you, Birgit. And for members who didn't quite gather that, yes, that's the burning of the hair of the boar to prevent other boars from coming. And,
yes,
it works, doesn't it, Birgit? And you've told me this, Jason, you've told me similar stories. I've heard all sorts of stories and you sort of can't believe it, but it has to be seen to be believed. Thank you, Birgit. That was brilliant. I'm conscious of time. I'm sure members are amazed about how much information we've just received, and I'm now going to add some more. Jason, I'd love to lead on to you now. I know that you have a slightly different approach to biodynamics. You've kind of taken it, you've built on it, and you've, dare I say, I don't mean this disparagingly, but certainly cherry-picked and expanded on certain ideas. So if you'd be able to tell us a little bit about more about what you get up to in Tablis, that would be amazing.
Sure, I'd love to. So I think it's fair to say that there are different pieces of biodynamics, which we feel like, some of which we feel like are really central to creating this vibrant riot of life in the vineyard and in the soil, most importantly, the soil. You're basically farming soil with biodynamics. There are other things that are beneficial, and certainly if you identify issues, are going to solve those issues. Then there's other pieces that I think it's also fair to say that we're skeptical about. For us, the really central piece of biodynamics is creating biodiverse, healthy soils full of microorganisms, and then giving those soils the raw materials that they need in order to make as much life as they can. So I think of a lot of the biodynamic preps as kind of like, they're kind of either individual vitamins or multivitamins, depending on what it is that you're applying. Something like the Horn compost, there are a whole bunch of different ingredients and micronutrients that are in there that are going to help build the vibrant life of your soil. Like the 501, which is a silica prep. I mean, silica is a micronutrient which is critical for grapevine photosynthesis. I mean, these are, if you dive into what the nutrients are that you're giving to the vines at different times, there's good science behind them in terms of the nutritional needs of a grapevine. The way that we think about this in a practical way is that we're trying to turn what is a monoculture. I mean, a vineyard has in general, one crop that you're growing in it, into a polyculture where you've got a range of things that are alive. We do this by interplanting other things in the vineyard. We have hundreds of fruit trees that are interplanted amongst the vineyard. We have sections that we leave to native vegetation. We have sections that we will plant specific plants that are known to be attractors for the insects that we want, to control the insects that we don't want. We have a flock of 300 sheep that we deploy out in the vineyard that graze the vineyard. We move them every 24 hours so they don't neglect any areas, they don't overgraze any areas. And they are doing their own work to spread their own manure and build that organic matter in the soil. They're essentially mobile composters. And we have an enormous compost program that we We start with the raw materials from our winemaking, the skins and the seeds and the stems, add the prunings that we take every year, add manure that we collect from the enclosure where we keep the sheep when we can't be out in the vineyard, add biochar where we're creating our own kind of essentially activated charcoal from the forest floor and the other woody elements that we're burning. And all of these combine to produce this incredibly nutrient-rich, complex addition that we'll add to the vineyard every year before the rainy season. And for us, the goal is give the grapevines in what is a very stressful place in Paso Robles, California, where it does not rain between May and the middle of November, where we might only have 6 inches to a couple of feet of topsoil above this calcareous, chalky rock. Give these grapevines an easier life, help them make sense out of their environment. I loved what Olivier said about essentially thinking like a vine. Think from a vine's perspective on what it needs. It needs certain things at certain times, and you're trying to make more of that more available to the vineyard at the times when it needs it. So we spend a lot of time working and developing biodiversity. We do the biodynamic preps. We feel like at the very least they're doing no harm. They're doing some good, even if that's not necessarily the nutrient that they might be lacking. It's taken together, it is a collection of vital micronutrients. And then we do very little with the calendaring piece of biodynamics because we feel like that's a little harder for us to wrap our heads around scientifically. We are trying to look at this as scientifically as we can. But I think the core key of biodynamics is that if you walk into a biodynamic vineyard, and both Birgit and Olivier have said this, it is alive. You'll hear the insects, you'll hear the birds, you'll see the vibrancy of the vines and the life of the other plants that live there. And that biodiversity is collecting a helpful and balanced biodiverse ecosystem that will naturally control the things you don't want. And that's the thing that I think often people forget is, like, if you have a spray that is going to get rid of a particular insect pest, it's not narrowly targeted. You're killing that insect pest, but you're also killing the things that eat that pest, and probably things that have some other benefit that you may not have even identified. And so you end up in this self-perpetuating cycle where you're forced to keep spraying because you don't have any of the natural controls there. And so establishing that ecosystem that's in balance is, for me, the heart and core of biodynamics, because a balanced ecosystem is an ecosystem that's going to be able to respond to whatever the issues are that you might be facing in a particular year or in a particular environment.
Thank you so much, Jason. That's fabulous. You did touch on one thing that I'm going to bring up. I was actually going to save it to the end as a bit of a debate piece, because I think it's arguably probably the most controversial part of biodynamics. I did actually send a message around my fellow MW students earlier, and this is sort of the hot topic that everybody wants answers on. Jason, you've touched on it. It's the hardest bit to get a science head around, perhaps, but for members that aren't aware, there is a biodynamic calendar. So what we've discussed largely so far has been biodynamic agriculture, which is one part of it. But the calendar works in some ways with the agriculture, but it also works with things like tasting. And there are certain days where biodynamics sort of suggests that some days are better for tasting wines, etc. So I would like to just throw the controversial gauntlet out there. Jason, you've already expressed that you struggle with that concept scientifically. Birgit, I think you're more aligned with this in terms of a sort of celestial, if that's the right word. And I wonder if you can give your point of view and your opinion on the biodynamic calendar in the broadest sense.
For us, during the year, there is a biodynamic calendar because everything is in process, and there are more or less 4 important dates. The first is the Easter, So you can imagine we start pruning in January, February, and then nature awakes and it starts to grow. And Easter is one time where we dig out the 500 also, and where we start to spray the 500 on the earth to get these full moon phases, the wax, the growth, the expansion of the nature to force that impulse. The second important is the summer solstice, which we now soon will have, 22 of June. So there is the change of growth into degeneration, into concentration, into ripeness. And this means for us that we go into new moon phases with our work, and with the spraying of 501, the silica, the quartz spraying, that we enforce the force of the sun, the cosmos. Then there is the 20th of St. Michael, September. It's also the day and night equal. And there it's a time where we dig in the 500 and we dig out the 501. It's also a special day. And also for sure it's Christmas. The fourth day and time, and then there starts a time after Christmas where we do nothing, which means we rest, but we also rest in our brain. We reflect and even we meditate. We think about the year, what happens, and we plan the new year. It's a holy time. Nature sleeps, and we should normally do nothing. So it's the whole year in kind of short words.
Thank you, Birgit. And then finally, Olivier, if you could maybe talk members through the concept of, this is a big piece of the puzzle, and I apologize, but the flower days, the leaf days, the root days, and I know that it's something a lot of people struggle to get their heads around and what it means. So if you wouldn't mind giving an overview on that, Olivier, that would be fantastic.
I'll need 4 minutes just to clarify all that, because I can see something that not many people understand. What does a calendar indicate? It indicates the movement of the moon and the position of the moon in front of different constellations. And this has a certain influence on different living organisms. So there's not such a thing as a good or a bad day, but there are certain days where other things are happening. So I do reassure you, what Tesco says when they say they only select wines during fruit days is absolute bullshit. Wine is good to drink every single day to start with. You don't need to be on a flower or a root day or anything like that. The wine may taste differently. If the wine is alive, it might taste differently under a fruit day or a flower day, but not such a thing, absolutely not such a thing as it might be better one day than the other. It will express differently. This calendar, we mostly use it as biodynamists on actions which are directly linked to something alive, like pruning the vineyard, for example, plowing a soil because you interact with the microorganisms, bottling the wine, racking, even more importantly, racking the wine off the lees, or do something with the yeast. Whenever you do something which is alive, on something which is alive, then you would consider the calendar. Why do we have a calendar? Well, it's just observations through the years, noticing that I need to explain to you 3 things for you to understand some of the basics of biodynamics. A plant, and I'm using Goethe's expression and not Steiner, which for me is a little bit controversial on certain things. So, but I love what Goethe said pre-Steiner, which really put the basis of what Steiner developed much later in the 1920s. Well, to understand a plant, you have 3 key. The first is, in which direction is the plant going? Toward the cosmos, toward the earth, or nowhere? An oak tree goes towards the earth. Look at the trunk, no fruits, no very small flowers. A cherry tree is all into the flowering system and not into the root system. That's towards the cosmos. These 2 plants shows you where the energy is going, you know. Sometimes it could be visual, sometimes it could be taste. Like you take garlic, for example. Everybody thinks the most powerful part of the garlic is the base of the trunk. It's not true. the flower of the garlic is much more powerful in taste than, for example, the garlic itself. A garlic through all its energy toward the cosmos, toward the sky, like a sunflower or something like that. That's it. Where is the vine? The vine is in the middle, not the earth, not the cosmos. The vine is a plant which is like nettle or horsetail, which is in between the two. And that's why we use a lot of plants in biodynamic, like nettle and horsetail, which are the same category of the vines, to reinforce the energy of the vines. Second key is those famous elements. I'll start with the first one, earth or mineral. The earth is the rock. To the rock, you add water, you obtain a plant. To the earth and the water element, you add the air element, you obtain an animal. The air is the movement. To the earth, the water, the air element, you add the fire element. That's Goethe who wrote it, over 100 years ago. You obtain the conscience, the fire, it's the thinking. You obtain the human person who is capable to control its cycles. What is a vine? A vine is a plant which is dominated by the earth element and a little bit the water element, and lacks a lot of the fire element, conscience. That's why a lot of the preparation we are doing, we are bringing this conscience to the vine. That's the explanation of the 500 and the 501. We use horns because the horn is where the cow is directing all its energy. Okay. Steiner had written 100 years ago, cut the horns of the cows, they become mad. And he was almost predicted what happened 80 years later. That's the first two keys to decrypt a plant. So a vine is no sense of direction. That's why we reinforce the 500, the 501 preparation, that reinforce that cosmos influence and that earth influence onto the vine that Birgit explained. And we use a lot of plants with a very strong fire element. Horsetails, nettles, achillea, camomilla, all these plants have a super strong fire element signature to reinforce this element in the vine, which is very weak. And it's a fire element that brings the vine into flowering and producing grapes. The third key is the most complicated. These are the planets. The vine planet signature is Mercury. Mercury in China is a water planet. A vine is driven by water. A vine wants water all the time. But if you want to make good wine, you don't want to give too much water to a vine. That's the contradiction that we have. And if you follow the planets through the calendar through the year, Mercury is roughly just before the flowering. That's why there's no problem with the vine until the flowering. And when you, from Mercury, you move to Venus, which is in the symbolic, love and all this. In biodynamic, it's reproduction. Then the trouble starts to happen. And that's why we start to use specific plants to help the vine to go through the flowering system. So the calendar, when the three planets of fire are lined up with certain constellations, like Leo, for example, the lion, I don't know you say that in English now, then you say you are in a fruit day because the fire constellation corresponds to fruit. If it's another constellation which is linked to flowering or earth or something like that, then you go into this constellation. That's the origin of the calendar. It is true, it's something which is extremely difficult to apprehend and understand. I'll give you one example. Take a strawberry, for example. What happens when you plant one strawberry plant in one little corner of your garden? You don't do anything, and you come back 10 years later. The strawberry is everywhere.
Everywhere.
And has colonized the garden, stopping many, many other plants to grow next to it. This character in a plant is described as the conqueror, the fighter, the warrior. Who is the god of that? It's Mars. So when we say the strawberry signature is Mars, I have no idea if the Mars planet is having an influence on the strawberry plants, but that's the way people use to describe a characteristic of a plant. Like if a plant has a huge flowering system, like an achillea, for example, well, we call it Venus. The vine is water, so we call it mercury. Hence the creation of the calendar, because observation over 100 years have told farmers that if you do certain things with a plant find with a specific planet, when it's in front of a certain constellation, it's beneficial for that plant more than other days. If you cut your grass every day during moon calendar for 28 days, you realize that sometimes what you've cut on the Monday will grow 10 times faster than what you cut the following Wednesday, which is not logic, you see. Then when you observe, okay, I've been cutting my grass every single day over the year, and I realized that whenever I cut my grass, when it was, for example, a leaf day, the grass would grow much faster. That was the origin of the, I'm just got my glass of wine now. That was the origin of the observation with the calendar. Yeah, but it's complicated to explain. Not every biodynamist would use it, but as a consumer, forget about it. A glass of wine should be good every day.
Oh, what a wonderful finishing point there, Olivier, because you've actually led me really nicely on to what I want to talk about next. I love that between the three of you, we've talked soil, deep farming, microorganisms, right through to celestial, transitions of planets and all sorts of things. So I appreciate the very broad but very thorough overview of biodynamics. Members, I know a few of you, I think Beth has said this is very complicated. It is. It's incredibly complicated. In my follow-up email, before we just go on to a few more questions and topics, I will mention I've recently read a fantastic book, pardon me, written by Monty Walden, and I'm sure our panelists are very familiar with it. And it's a huge tome, but it's helped me to understand it. But I do genuinely think unless you're farming like these three are, it's just mind-boggling. So we've gone through the farming, we've gone through what it is as best we can in our short space of time. But I'd like to move on to a few other questions around. Well, first of all, I'd actually like to ask you, and maybe starting with, we'll go Jason, Birgit and Olivier. I'd just like to ask you what your biggest challenge was in moving to biodynamics. It all sounds wonderful, like we're going to produce this incredible wine all the time on amazing soils, etc. But it isn't without its challenges. So Jason, if you're happy to go first, I'd love to hear what was your biggest challenge in moving to biodynamics.
So we were not coming from, say, a conventional modern chemical farm starting point. So if you think of that as one end and biodynamics as the other end, we were already sort of here farming organically, doing a lot of composting, all of that. But for us, I think the hardest thing at least for us to wrap our heads around was the timing of how everything had to be done. And which things mattered and which things didn't matter. That's for us, we tend to approach things experimentally. So we'll make a decision and do it across a 20 acre or 10 acre stretch. And then if it works, we'll double that. If it works, we'll double that. So we were expecting that the benefit principally for us in farming biodynamically was going to be in the longevity of the grapevines, that we were giving them a slightly easier life in this high stress environment because we were making better, healthier, richer soils that were going to hold more water and generally help them be under a little less stress each year. We were not really expecting to taste a difference in the wines from making these changes, at least not in the short term. We thought the benefit would be in the long term because our neighbors would have to replant their vines because they were exhausted when they were 25 years old and our vines would live to 50. And the very first year that we switched a 20 acre slice of the vineyard to biodynamics, the lots that came from those blocks floated to the top of our blind tasting trials, which we weren't expecting. And we didn't even notice it until after the fact. We weren't tracking it that way. But we taste all of the different lots. We might have 20 different Grenache lots and 15 Roussanne lots, and all of the lots from those biodynamic sections all scored very highly in our blind tastings. And so that happened a couple of years. We increased the vineyard, the portion of the vineyard we were farming biodynamically. And the harder part was scaling the things that you can do pretty easily on 5 or 10 acres to something when you're farming 125 acres, because it's not things that can generally be mechanized particularly well. So the scaling up of things like making teas and making preps and applying them, and that was something that needed more time and needed more labor. But the results were there. The results in the health of the vines, the health of the vineyard, the health of the cover crops that we were seeing in the winter seasons, and the quality of the grapes and the quality of the wine was dramatic enough that we felt like it was, even if we didn't know exactly what was making the improvements that we saw or what the impact was, that it was worth doing comprehensively.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm actually going to come back to the taste of the wines in a minute, because I want to explore that more with you, Jason, and with everyone else. To just quickly, I'm going to go on to Birgit and then to Olivier on the challenges that you found, and then we will come back to taste. So Birgit, any challenges that you found?
Yeah, I found my challenge in me. So it was my brain, my mind. I got to know biodynamic 95 in Bordeaux, and I was really flashed by the soil, by the preparation. I said, okay, I want to do that in my home place, as I knew the other thing. And then coming home, getting to learn all the things about our terroir, I said, I was really scared, does it work? And it's all what Olivier was telling you. So it said, okay, I never will understand all that facts. So step by step, but we went into organic production, and then I did a lot of education and skills, and then I changed my mind. And well, there was the year, one of the first hottest year in Austria, 2003. Then there was coming new diseases, overripened grapes. So I really saw that there's completely unbalanced in the vineyard. So I said, now it's time. Now I'm skilled and brave enough. I will do it. So we changed, and finally we have much more balance in the wine. We get much more sugar ripeness, phenolical ripeness at one point. There is much more this vibration, elasticity. When the vines go with the wind, they don't break, and you will find that in the wine, then in the glass, because this vibration, this silkiness, and even this the tannin, and even this bright pure fruit, you have it in the glass. So finally, I'm happy, and I really yes.
Birgit, it's lovely as well. We can hear birdsong with you, which I think is just a testament to the beautiful place that you're in. I mean, it's not often that we get this sort of gorgeous birdsong echo. So very fitting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now you've obviously just touched on taste as well. I am going to come back to it because I know we've even just had a question in about it as well. It is fascinating. We've had two, sorry, can you taste it, etc. But just before we go on to taste, final point, Olivier, have you found any challenges? What have been your greatest?
Well, actually, they always say the most difficult thing is actually to turn organic first, because it's very easy to get used to chemicals and herbicides and insecticides, in terms of practicality, bigger machines and more efficiency and all that. So our biggest challenge in the beginning were to find the proper tools to cultivate very, very steep vineyard. When you're on the flat, like in Bordeaux, it's easy to find any machine to plow and all that. When you have a vineyard which is 40, 50, 60% slope, like the roof of a house, you can't do this. So you need to go back to certain techniques, like using a winch or horses and things like that. And obviously, 25 years ago, it was very difficult to find a manufacturer who would do this kind of equipment again. So basically going into attics, literally, and digging out old rusty plows and have them rebuilt and things like that, Then it's the intellectual understanding of biodynamics. So I always say in the beginning, I took it like a recipe. I don't know what temperature cooks a white of an egg, but if someone tells me 55 degrees Celsius, I'll do it, and I look how it works. And then you understand by sometimes overcooking or undercooking something, you know exactly what you learn from your process. So in the beginning, I think you just try to apply as best as possible a recipe. Like if you buy a cookbook and you try to do a nice recipe that is complicated, you do it by the book. And the more you understand the principle, the more you create your own recipe and your own results, you see. There's not such one farming in biodynamics. Some people like certain plants. Some people just pick what they find around their own estate, which is a clever way to do it, obviously. So the understanding, the philosophy, and all this, that comes with time. But in the beginning, I say, just follow the recipe, look at the result, look what you like, what you don't like, and then gradually, as you understand more, you change to adapt to your own area, climate, cultivation, type of wine you want to do. There's one thing I like to say is, which I didn't expect at all in the beginning. You know, everybody in the world, like in the normal world wine growing, not the new region like England maybe or something like that, but we're all concerned by more heat, more sunshine, increasing alcohol levels into the wines, lack of acidity sometimes. But over 25 years, I've seen all our wines dropping into pH, increasing into acidity, with a much better control to the alcohol levels that we reach today. Today, our wines have much less alcohol than they had 25 years ago, for one very important reason. The vine functions much better, much faster physiologically, so I can beat the global warming of our area, and I can harvest much earlier grapes which are physiologically riper, thanks to biodynamic farming. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Olivier. So we've had Olivier talk about dropping pHs, lower alcohol. We had Birgit touch on fruit. Jason actually replied in the chat, and I hope you don't mind, Jason. Would you be able to say out loud to those not following the chat how you found the flavor? And then we'll maybe broadly brush stroke across everyone just to see if there were any common changes in flavors or any discrepancies between the panelists.
Yeah, and so the question that I got was essentially like, how did things taste different in the blocks that we were farming biodynamically? And it's not a simple answer. We found them more expressive, which implies both a certain amount of intensity, but it's not just intensity, it's also the balance of flavors. I think Olivier's comments about the vines being better able to regulate their accumulation of sugar and their maintenance of acid is absolutely a part of it. So the vines are producing fruit in better balance before it goes into the winemaking process. You might not be able to measure a different sugar level. The sugar level may be the same, but it's the balance of sugar and acid and flavors that are evolving the longer it spends on the vine. So it felt to us like the wines just had more life to them from those biodynamic blocks. And it's not as simple as saying it tasted stronger, it tasted sharper, it tasted brighter, or it was denser. It wasn't that. It was a question of expressiveness. It wasn't a question of power, but of that balance of flavors that felt right.
Brilliant, thank you. And Birgit, Olivier, have you had similar experiences? I'll maybe go with Birgit first, if that's all right.
Yes, I totally agree that we have much more balance now in the wine, much more vibration. The tannins of the red wines are much more silky, fine, elegant. So that's what we are looking for. So I think what we find in the vineyards, you will find it also in the glass. So this is what is the best thing, that the biodynamic approach is a healing approach for nature, for the wine, but also it helps us to get incredible terroir wines.
Thank you, Birgit, so much. And Olivier, have you found similar experiences yourself?
Yes, of course. Not everything we do in a winery is necessarily linked to biodynamic principle of farming. Sometimes it's just also a personal choice and decision. There are many things which are not at all biodynamic, but we always try to estimate the consequence if we do something eventually on the style of the wine or something like that. And I think and that's why you find today, probably in proportion, much more wineries turning into biodynamic than maybe agricultural farms, because we make a product which is first not necessary. I mean, it might be necessary for some people to drink a glass of wine, but let's say it's still a luxury product. You know, it's not like bread or flour or water or these basic ingredients. So wine also has to reflect the culture of the area, a place, a taste, something which is unique. And biodynamic farming is developing a lot into viticulture because it probably allows people to make a wine which shows more the characteristic of a specific place. And that's eventually what people want to see. If you just want to drink wine Riesling with the same taste that come from the whole over the world, it's pretty boring. You know, you want to see the influence of the climate, the people, the soil, whatever is around the vineyard. And I think biodynamic farming, the way I see it, increases these differences and local characteristics, which make the wine world much more fun in a certain way. Or the way, I mean, at the wine society, you just sell 10 different wines and that's it, instead of the hundreds you're selling now,
I think that's absolutely, I think the idea of biodynamic farming as kind of an amplifier for terroir is a really good way of thinking about it, because what you're doing is you're essentially, you're giving the vines all of the incentives to really invest in the place in which they're grown. You're not giving them this particular chemical fertilizer at this time and this particular chemical fertilizer at that time. You're not making things in a uniform, generic way. You're instead really encouraging the specifics of the place to be as alive as possible. And I think that has to show up in the lines.
Yes, and in addition to that, there's nothing to be added in the cellar. So we are always talking about the vineyards and so, and for sure there's the balance in the vineyards, and we have done ripe grapes which have enough nutrition, and so in the cellar there is a soft flow intervention. There's nothing to be added, no yeast enzymes. So this is the terroir we bring out in the wine, so we can produce much more interesting and local wines which are very identical and very unique.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that word, Birgit, authentic. They do feel very authentic, biodynamically farmed wines. Now, members, I should say that we were going to save 15 minutes for questions. I have noticed on the Q&A that both Olivier and Jason have actually been answering things in writing. And if they're happy for me to, what I'll do is I'll allow Birgit to add some bits in tomorrow in writing, perhaps, and then I will send them around over email, because I think there's actually a huge amount of information. So all the members that are signed up, I think it would be very valuable perhaps to receive that in writing rather than rehash over topics again, if that's okay. Because I do have one question finally that we haven't really had a chance to discuss. And I think it's quite important, particularly for us as wine consumers. I know that my biodynamic understanding and journey has been varied. I've seen it to believe it, should we say. But I know that a lot of members perhaps have come today with an open mind, but perhaps less experience. I think possibly is there a challenge, and this is going to be a question to all the speakers, around consumer perceptions of biodynamics. We've obviously talked about the breadth of what it involves, but we even touched on, Birgit, just then, this sort of idea of authentic wine. Sometimes biodynamics can get confused with natural wines. I wonder maybe if we could start with Olivier, what do you think we need to do as the Wine Society perhaps to better educate or inform or just bring members along on a biodynamic journey? How do we tell them?
Sorry, my computer just froze. It's a good question. I mean, if the word is biodynamic wines are more authentic, I say you also by promoting these wines, you have this. You must also have the same approach. You know, I'm not saying that only biodynamic wines are interesting to drink or good to drink? Because someone asked this question. I don't just drink biodynamic wine myself. I have some friends. I know how they work, and I appreciate still their wines. But eventually, what I've learned through the year is to recognize a wine that does me good. You know, it's one thing that the wine smells nicely, has good flavor, the good balance, and all this. That's something that a clever enologist can create by using enology, chemistry, and all these kind of things, and replicate, you know, an original product. But eventually, what no enologist can do in the cellar is to produce a wine that nourishes you with good things. And I'm not talking about vitamins or something like that. I'm just purely talking about the energy of a wine. And it's like to talk to some people. Sometimes you feel that you're losing energy when you have to converse with someone. I hope it's not the case with me tonight, but some products, some wine, some food, some people just pump your energy. And you're like, oh my God, you know, and you're more tired after drinking a glass of wine than you were before. A good wine is not just taste, it's also what it brings to yourself. And that's something that a lot of people have to train themselves when they taste some wine, when they eat some food. Does this food really nourish me? Does it satisfy me? Is it something that my body wants? You know? And I'm not talking about calories, vitamins, or something like that, but really the inner energy of the wine. And that's really something with biodynamic wine I've seen. And I've been to tastings, I've been to dinners and all that, where we drink sometimes maybe too much, but I never feel tired, you see. That's, for me, something which is very important. But how to promote that, I don't know. It's yeah.
More tastings.
Yeah, more tasting, maybe drink less, but drink better and things like that, you know? Yeah.
Lovely. And Birgit, do you have anything to add to that? Maybe just advice for us as a retailer on how best to communicate your wines.
Yeah, for me, it's the same approach for, like Olivier, that when people get in the sense of the feeling, how do I feel when I drink or eat this? And sometimes wine can get you tired and you don't know why. So, but also there are wines which makes you inspired and delight and helps to get you a very nice evening. So it is to bring in my winery when I have a tasting and I talk a lot. I always say, just get that in your feeling. Yeah, what are you feeling about when you drink that and consume that? And the other thing is, I got a tasting from winemakers in France, and he said, taste the wines. There are 5 wines are organic and 5 wines are biodynamic, and they didn't say me something, and they tasted, and I got the experiences also. So the differences in the wine. So probably it's a good thing to talk about the feeling of the consumers, how they feel after drinking, and also what they taste. And then I think step by step, we will not reach 100% of the consumers. It isn't the truth, but I think step by step we can reach much more people, because it will help nature, it will help climate, and it will be a good thing for all of us, for our body. That's it.
Thank you, Birgit. And lastly, Jason, the same question, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I think ultimately the proof is in the bottle. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the greatest wines in the world are made from biodynamic principles. So I think that's a piece of it. I think Birgit touched on another thing, which is that there are so many kind of benefits in terms of externalities of biodynamic farming. I mean, if somebody is farming biodynamically, they are a part of building a biodiverse and healthy ecosystem that will help their soils. It helps the soils absorb atmospheric carbon. That's one of the big principles of regenerative agriculture, is that your soils are becoming a repository for atmospheric carbon. And all of that is based on biodynamic principles. So you're creating a farm that has positive impacts on not just your soils, but on your neighbors, on your use of resources, on your ability to support species that are going to have benefits to the broader society, and ultimately be at least a part of the fight against things like resource scarcity and climate change. So there are reasons to explore biodynamics because of the wines and the expressiveness of the fruit, but there's also reasons to support it because of the positive externalities that biodynamic farms create. And I hope that there are, like, you'll actually get people who are interested in trying the wines because of the farming piece, and people who become interested in the farming because of the wines that they try. And it's that feels like kind of ultimately what all of us need. Thanks,
Jason. I think that's honestly the perfect way to end the session. It's certainly the explanation of in other words that you gave me 5 years ago when I got interested in biodynamics. The idea of it being part of the bigger picture, and not only are you producing these wines that clearly have incredible quality, but you also have all these external factors. I don't think anyone can deny that. The proof is literally in the pudding. So thank you. To Olivier, to Birgit, to Jason, and Mahesh behind the scenes, and to all you members at home, I really hope that you've enjoyed this evening as much as I have. I think this is probably one of, if not the most fascinating subjects to dig into in the world of wine. It is huge, it is wide-ranging. We have covered almost every facet I could think of in some way or shape or form, be it through the Q&A or the videos this evening. So thank you. And our three speakers, thank you so much for your time. I know it was a struggle to pull together the exact time that we could all do, but I can see the thanks coming in, and I really think that members have appreciated it. I certainly have. And I hope that you'll join us again. And I hope that members, if you haven't tried any of these three glorious speakers' wines, then you have to get yourself a bottle. And like all of them have said, the proof is in the pudding and in the taste. So sorry I'm not tasting along this evening. If I were, I would certainly be giving you all a big cheers. But thank you all so much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, Anna, and everybody. Thank you. Have a nice evening. Jason, nice sunny day for you.
Yes, it's always sunny. At this time of year, we haven't seen clouds in 6 weeks here. So
we can give you some of ours.
I honestly, I'm jealous. So balance is what I'm looking for. Maybe a little less of all one thing or all the other.
And thank you, Olivier, again.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening. Bye.